and leading science and innovation, some lessons from my own journey. It is not from any textbook, but from my own life. I was born in a very poor family. My father died when I was 6. My mother brought me to Mumbai doing menial jobs, and I walked barefoot until I was 12. I studied under street lights, but I got an opportunity to get educated because of a scholarship, which was almost $1 per month. So this has been the beginning of my life. And therefore, I always look at, people call me a dangerous optimist, because if a dangerous optimist can do something in life and contribute back to the society, I think everybody can do so. So that is about my personal life. About my professional life, you can see some of the designations here. But let me tell you that my first connect with your great country, Indonesia, was in 1990s, because I was a World Bank consultant on what was called as an ITDP project, Industrial Technology Development Project. And I visited Indonesia during 92, 97, had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Habibie, who was then the Minister of Science and Technology, and also the Minister of Industry, a number of reforms that we did there. I had that opportunity to do so in Croatia, in Serbia, in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka. And of course, as was mentioned a little earlier, led the transformation of CSIR. CSIR is a chain of 40 national laboratories, like National Chemical Laboratory, National Physical Laboratory, and so on. And I'm very proud to say that when the top 10 achievements of 20th century of Indian science and technology were listed, it started with Ramanujan, the great mathematician, or Raman, the Nobel laureate, and our Green Revolution, etc. But I'm very proud to see that the CSR transformation in late 90s that we did with the entire CSR family participating is ranked among the top 10 achievements of 20th century. And one is very proud of that. And this is a great organization, these 40 laboratories. Like, for example, when we had COVID, we had a big challenge. And I remember all the laboratories that you see, which are all across India, working together to create diagnostics, create therapeutics, create vaccines, create surveillance mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So one is very proud of this organization, which is a premier organization. I'm also proud to say that just as we have CSR India, there are other research technology organizations, and I was the president of Global Research Alliance, which was formed by 60,000 scientific staff from Battelle, United States of America, CSR India, CSR South Africa, CSR Australia, DTI Denmark, Fraunhofer Germany, CIRIM Malaysia, TNO Netherlands, and VTT Finland. So, my friends, what I'm going to talk to you is about the experience that I had as a result of my exposure there. I come to the Indonesian situation at the moment. I was looking at the ADB report of 2020, which is a recent one. And I found that in terms of science, technology, and innovation indicators, if you looked at Indonesia versus Asian, here are the data. The R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP, Asian average is 0.7, whereas Indonesia is 0.08. Private share of R&D expenditure, 46% versus 26%. Patent applications, 348 versus 37% applications. And scientific and technical article journals are also orders of magnitude lower. Now, immediately one would say, oh my God, where are we? What do we need to do? But what assures me is the next slide, which shows the Ministry of Finance, Republic of Indonesia report done jointly with ADB. And it says very positively that the national policy agenda places increasing emphasis on science and technology. The emerging technology startup ecosystem has already produced 3 unicorns and 1 decacorn valued at over $10 billion. And Indonesia is developing a critical mass of STEM graduates, with the country projected to be the 4th largest producer of STEM graduates in G20 by 2030. And finally, the population is young. and the middle class is growing. And that's a great news. So I wouldn't worry very much about where we are, but where we can go in terms of our aspirations for the future. So as I said, these are lessons of that I have learned from my experience over the last 50 years or so, the 5 Mashelkar mantras for science leadership. The first one, very important, it is the size of the idea that matters and not the size of the budget. So the first message is think big. The second is, in science, only those are remembered who say the first word in science or who say the last word in science. And therefore, a bold creator, not a safe follower. The third lesson is betting on risky ideas brings huge returns in terms of scientific breakthroughs. So take risks, fund risks. Next one is leaders create next practice, not just follow the best practice created by others. And therefore, drop the follower syndrome to create next practice. Be a leader. And finally, leadership needs a robust national innovation ecosystem built on a tripod of talent, technology, and trust. So build the next generation Indonesia innovation ecosystem. So what I'm going to do now is to take you through all the 5 mantras and tell you from my own experience what I've found. National Chemical Laboratory had 1,100 people, and I remember young Mashelkar here taking over in 1989, 2 years before India liberalized and opened up. And I remember I addressed them after 2 hours after I took over. That does not mean I had just thought for 2 hours. I had thought for 2 months on what I'm going to say. And I said, our National Chemical Laboratory should be International Chemical Laboratory. All right, thinking big. And I remember the first message I gave, it is not the power of the budget, but the power of idea that matters. And the second is on patenting, not publish or perish, but patent, publish, and prosper. And I remember setting up a very heady dream that we will export our knowledge even to the greatest multinationals in the world. And I remember this polycarbonates was something that was manufactured by General Electric, and they had 40% world market share. 40%. They were leaders. And I remember creating our young people creating 3 US patents, which we licensed in 1994. That was the first ever reverse transfer of technology from India. Can you just imagine? All the time we were begging and borrowing technologies from abroad. And the same laboratory which was doing reverse engineering copying was capable of doing reverse transfer. And then we created a strategic alliance between NCL over 10 years, leading us to $15 million license fee. But other partnerships, like the others, kept on coming. Great companies of the world, DuPont came, joined hands. Dow came, joined hands. Procter & Gamble came, joined hands. And we were doing so well that Jack Welch, the chairman of GE, said, if they are so good, why are we not there? And that is where the Jack Welch R&D Center in Bangalore came up. And then once it came up, others started coming. By the way, if you visit that center, you will find a conference room named after me. It was a very sort of wonderful feeling when that was opened up. So India has become now a global R&D platform, 1165 R&D centers by MNCs, 323,000 scientists, engineers. Many are returning, by the way, and reversing the brain drain, because one of our biggest problems is that of brain drain. And Bengaluru has displaced now Tokyo as the most preferred R&D destination. And some MNCs are creating even 1/3 of their global IP in India. So it is rather remarkable that that small step of saying National Chemical Laboratory will be International Chemical Laboratory, not only will partner, will deliver technology to them, has made all the difference. So that's the first one, my own experience. The second is, in science, only those are remembered who say the first word in science or say the last word. So I mean, myself an active scientist, even today I do science. And I remember one of the areas in which I worked was stimuli responsive gels. You know, the jello that you see, you can make it responsive. 1 gram of a polymer can absorb 200 grams of water. And by just switching, it can come back to just the original form. And again, you can swell it. So they are swelling, de-swelling. And I remember our work, the first breakthrough on self-filling, we showed how like in body we have self-healing, how you can make the gel self-healing. We had the first breakthrough on self-organization. We had the first breakthrough on creating enzyme-like activity, putting life into this gel and creating these switching hydrogels. And also we created a magic molecule called acrylyl 6-aminocaproic acid, which has found applications. Can you just imagine? Elastic enteric implants. Who did that work? Bob Langer from MIT. They picked it up and followed us. Biomineralization. Who did that work? University of California, San Diego, and similarly in stem cells, and also in oil well drilling, Halliburton, and so on. What is the point I'm trying to make? The point I'm trying to make is that we were the first to do all this, and the rest of the world followed us. And that got me the honor as an individual scientist. This is the president of Royal Society, Nobel laureate, actually shaking hands, but the most important was signing in this particular book. By the way, on page 9, Newton has signed in that particular book, and this is considered as one of the highest prize after the Nobel Prize. And I happen to be among the 3 Indian engineering scientists elected in 360 years. And also recently, I got the Lenovo Science Prize, considered as a Nobel Prize for developing world scientists, and I delivered the talk in terms of the breakthrough that we had. I think what is the simple point I'm trying to make? The simple point was that we did not follow, we led by creating disruptive, original ideas. That's the second lesson. The third is betting on risky ideas bring huge returns in terms of scientific breakthroughs. So take risk, fund risks. Now, I remember my own experience on promoting risk-taking. For example, when I was the director of National Chemical Laboratory, I created what is called as a kite flying fund, which is just 1% of the fund. And I would give it to those people who had breakthrough ideas, maybe chance of success in 1 in 100. So actually, I was trying to support adventurism, if you like. And then when I went to CSIR, 40 national laboratories, I created this new India fund, a new idea fund, and then public-private, a new Millennium Indian Technology Leadership Initiative. Now, in all this, leadership is the key word. So if you just see this, how it was positioned, look at very carefully this particular part. Now, here is market certainty and here is technology certainty. India had always operated in this quadrant. That means markets were certain, technology was certain, because we were copying. Anyway, I said nothing doing. We'll go to the unknown territory, this one, where technologies are uncertain as well as markets are uncertain. And this became India's largest personal public-private partnership in history, by the way. More than 100 private sector companies and 250 institutions have worked together during the last 20 years. Then grand challenges, seeking game-changing solutions, all right, not incremental, but breakthrough, disruptive. And bold financial instruments for risk financing, even public sector, private sector will get money from the government. These are unheard of, all right? And to be returned only if you are successful. So it was not venture capital, it was adventure capital. And then, of course, it was based on talent, technology, and trust. And a number of breakthroughs have come as a result of that. One of them I will show proudly, because we are all talking about climate change. We are all talking about green hydrogen. We are all talking about fuel cells. And India's first fuel cell, indigenous fuel cell, with some breakthrough technology created by Dr. Ashish Lele, who is the director of NCL, in partnership with industry, Mr. Ravi Pandit, KPIT Technology. You can see here, we launched in 16 December 2021. In many ways, in terms of technology, it is ahead of the rest of the world. And it came because we started taking risks, and in 2002, we launched a major program. And the theme of my life has been this: leapfrogging to pole vaulting. This is the book that we wrote. This is creating the magic of radical yet sustainable transformation. And the basic idea is that why does the frog leap? Because it is afraid of the predators. It is afraid of the enemy and jumps a few feet. No, we must pole vault. The size of the pole is the size of our aspirations. And as I said, keep our aspirations high. And this won the best business book of the year award, by the way. So we have to have a paradigm shift in innovation strategy. We proud ourselves as being followers. We proud ourselves as being fast followers. No, we must lead. But while leading, it's not just leapfrogging, pole vaulting. And the book actually gives so many ideas and achievements which belong to the pole vaulting category. So these are the three lessons. The fourth lesson is leaders create next practice, not just follow best practice. So what are the examples of this? You know, in my mother's name, Anjani Mashelkar Inclusive Innovation Award, as I told you, I was born in a very poor family, but my mother supported my education, and whatever I am is because of her. So in her name, and she always used to say, think of the poor, make high technology work for the poor. And I remember creating this particular award. This is Rahul Rastogi. He created a ECG device, electrocardiogram device. What is it? Normal practice, the best practice is you go down there, lie down, and there are 12 leads, and it takes half an hour to get your ECG, etc. He said, no. Why can't we have something like this, which is sort of leadless Ecg Monitor? It looks like this, basically. And you put your two thumbs here on the sensors for 15 seconds. And then also there is a sensor which you put 15 seconds above and below your heart, and you can get the ECG. That's the next practice. And I'm very proud to say this is now, these are now gone to 12 countries, and around 0.25 million devices have been already sold. That is best practice to next practice. Look at Mishkin Ingawale, for example. You can see me giving the award to him along with Mrs. Anuaga, a great philanthropist. And what did he do? Hemoglobin. So he created a non-invasive hemoglobin test. What are the best practice? Invasive with needles. And time will be around 2 hours. He created a non-invasive, no needles, just time for results will be just 2 minutes. Next practice. And the cost was not just $2, 2 cents. And you can see this is what he did. The first device that he had, Touch HB 1.0, by using high technology, photoplethysmography, spectrophotometry, advanced software, etc. And now he has created the next version, which is a very special camera. It captures the picture of conjunctiva and uses the method of reflectance photometry to estimate the hemoglobin content in the blood. Completely non-invasive. Just look into the camera and you know hemoglobin. And more than 1 million sort of citizens from villages have taken advantage of this. Breast cancer, for example. This is Mirsha, ultra portable, accurate, minimal training, wireless, cloud connected, instant results, basically, completely non-invasive. And what was the change? The best practice was invasive with mammography, non-invasive, no mammography. Painful, no, painless. Cost per scan, $100, no, just $1. And it requires specialists, no specialists at all. And you can see it is going now to 25 plus countries because they have formed a partnership with GE Healthcare. You can see what difference it is going to make. This is the issue of best practice to next practice. Finally, building innovation cultural constructs, traditional mindsets, and for all this leadership, you require daring. Traditional mindsets, oh, it's too risky. Oh, suppose it fails. We are always afraid of failure. Impossible, never done before. Somebody has tried it already. Or if you're good English, you will say, let me play devil's advocate. But all it means is that we are scared to take risks. No. The kind of leaders Indonesia has to create have to be ones which find opportunity where others see nothing. They convert problems into an opportunity. They're never a part of a problem. They're always a part of a solution. They set quantum goals, big goals. They drive discontinuity and bait on risky ideas. The last one now. Leadership needs a robust national innovation ecosystem built on tripod of talent, technology, and trust. So I must say innovation ecosystem is very complex. You know, there is economy demands something, then you generate ideas, then you use the talent, your mentorship, create entrepreneurs, etc., etc. There are laws, there are regulations, there are media, there are corporations, whole range of elements come in. And they must all work in sync. What is the problem in academia? We do work by using federal grants. and sponsored research and so on and so forth. So this is converting money into knowledge. But here, knowledge has to be converted into money. This is converting knowledge, money into knowledge. This is converting knowledge into money. And there is a big risk here. So what do we need to do? Create innovation teams, build incubators, angel funding, venture capital. Then only will you be able to cross that particular bridge. So that is what I mean by ecosystem. Let me end in next 2 minutes by telling you a simple thing which has a profound implication. Please hang this in every laboratory in Indonesia like we do in India. Seed is an idea, okay? And the gardener is the entrepreneur. And he dig the soil to check the quality, in-depth market research to understand what is the market and so on. You have to sow the seed, okay? But you have to enter the market at the right time. And the quality of seed is very important. The potential of idea, a terrible idea will not yield you any result at all. But most importantly, you cannot put it into sand where it will not grow. It has to be put into a quality of soil with the right market to launch the idea. And most important is that when it is small sapling, it is very vulnerable to threat, delicate, requires utmost care. And you require different nutrients as it grows, mentorship, persistent passion of the entrepreneur. And you have to protect it, basically. Criticism from clients, critics, then protection from strong winds. Already established competitors will try to knock you off. Pesticide and fertilizer, genuine customer feedback about the prototype, and association with other plants for nutrients, right network of people. Then only you will move from a seed to small sapling, and then from the sapling to the tree, okay? Now, a successful idea will come to the create a big tree. But even if the tree grows, you can see first it must flower, that is business which is break even, and then it must bear fruit. So our journey is from seed to fruit. We don't eat seed, we eat fruit. And for that, this entire process is there. But even if the tree branches, how does it assure its survival? So it must diversify into different areas, it must grow in core business, and it must have firm roots, sound strategy, and solid operations. So how do we assure the success? And this is something that I have given in my book, chapter 3. It calls the Assure framework. Your business will survive and succeed if the following attributes: affordable, scalable, sustainable, universal, that means user-friendly, customer-friendly, rapid, excellence in terms of technology, and distinctive. All these elements. And these elements, by the way, we have used this particular framework in India on a variety of forums. I will not have the time to go through it, even it is being used sort of abroad by users being corporates. And most important is that in my book, you will find in the 3rd chapter, what we have done is that we have given the names of the successful businesses at one point in time. We have given this matrix and shown as to at certain time, they did not fulfill this sort of matrix and they fell. Like, for example, BlackBerry was a great success at a point in time. But then came the touch, then came the other technologies, basically, and they were still sticking to the keyboard and just as an email machine, and they don't exist today. So like that, in each case, we have sort of done this. So what I would strongly suggest is that this framework, which is quantitative as well as qualitative, be used. Finally, this is my final slide. We have to create an ecosystem, as I said. It must comprise physical system, well-furnished laboratories, intellectual construct, of course. We must have clever people, intelligent people, creative people, but also culture. Culture is extremely important. And then there is a critical support system in terms of educational research, industry, talent, technology, and like I said, venture capital, which is able to take risks. And there must be backed up by public procurement policies, robust IPR regimes, balanced regulatory systems, but there must be a national aspiration of leadership. And then we can talk in terms of innovation-led, accelerated growth. And Indonesia as an assured leader in the framework that I talked about in science and innovation. So the idea is discovering Indonesia, innovating Indonesia, and making Indonesia not just for Indonesia, but for the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mashelkar, for your sharing your life and the lessons you draw from it. I will head immediately to welcome Professor Adit Utarini, and I heard that her name has become like a nickname, and I was told I might use it. So you Uut. And yes, thank you. So welcome here, and maybe just shortly introduce you, because you are one of the most influential people of 2021 on Times Magazine. And you're an Indonesian leading scientist. You're a lecturer at the Faculty of Medicine, Public Health and Nursing at the Gadjah Mada University. I hope my pronunciation is not too bad on this. You have been really understanding a lot of work around how mosquitoes can actually be an instrument to fight against dengue rather than just be a promoter of it. And probably you can share a bit more about your own findings and how you as a scientist have found success and achievements way beyond your own life. So in that sense, I'm, as all of us, very curious to hear your keynote. Oud, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rainer, for pronouncing my nickname correctly, because I know it's a bit difficult to pronounce "u" instead of "you", isn't it? All right. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the 30 participants as high potential researchers. So I'm sure they've been gone through very tough processes, and indeed there's a high hopes for the researchers in the future. And also thank you to the Conversation Indonesia for this initiative, Science Leadership Collaboration, and inviting me to be part of this, to share some thoughts, but also my own reflections of my research journey in public health. So next, please. Yeah. So this is the topic that was given to me, and I think throughout the topic I will share also experiences and again reflections on this research on the use of Wolbachia Aedes aegypti for combating dengue. So it's like how do you say, fighting mosquitoes with mosquitoes in a good way. And for this topic, next please. I'm coming also from the research side. So here is maybe my bias when we talk about science and policy, because I'm coming from the science part. And of course, being researcher, we certainly love evidence. I mean, we work every day struggling to produce the best evidence that we can produce, and this is not just any evidence, but we are really trying to produce good evidence, best evidence. And so coming from this side, then in the way I will structure a bit of introduction, and then spending a little some time about talking about scientists, which is ourselves, and policymakers. I'm not sure if in this room also there are policymakers, maybe not. We're all scientists. And the challenges, and then a need for building new competencies, and then the conclusion. So next, please. Yeah, when we speak about evidence, I think first of all, maybe we thought this should be simple. It should not be difficult. And what we want to produce is that evidence that is not just good for publications, but also good for changing people's lives, making a big difference in people's life. And if we look at the history of evidence-based medicine, now obviously this is coming from the medicine interest. Already back in 1996, that we heard about this evidence-based medicine, that anything to be done on human, it has to be made very careful, for example, of course, but also unless there's a very strong evidence, then we should be careful. So it was this practitioner, Dr. David Sackett, that initiated the need for evidence-based medicine. And this we applied when we screen for certain diseases, or when we diagnose particular diseases, provide treatment, use technology, health technology assessment, and also trying to predict the future in certain disease given certain drugs. So for medicine, this has been very, very well known. And I think for students, even from the first day they are in the medical school, they are taught about this evidence-based medicine and the levels of medicine. So then this concept was kind of spread to other professions, evidence-based nursing, evidence-based public health, and also the evidence-based management even, and evidence-based policy, which again, it looks simple that, okay, let's apply this evidence-based medicine, but focusing on public policy for society use. So in theory, next slide, please. In theory, this should be simple, with a clear sort of task description that we as scientists, researchers, we spend every day, well, not 24 hours, but maybe 20 hours a day, just to focus on producing the evidence. That's our task. And when it's there, we hope then in this very rapid changing world, from issues such as climate change up to AI, artificial intelligence, then we want this scientific knowledge not just as a knowledge, but then to help and to solve societal issues, so that the policymakers will then be happy and take our knowledge and put it in policy. So that was sort of in our mind. It should be clear. Researcher and scientist is our own job, and the policymakers, they of course they will develop the best policy for the people. However, when we look at in practice, I think evidence-based policy doesn't always work. I think in our old field of interest, we've seen many gaps, even huge gaps. Next slide, please. Yeah, I love this bridge. I mean, I've never been there. I've never been in China. But looking at this, it inspires me and to give that maybe this is something that what we need. We cannot just go with a simple bridge going from one way to the other end, but the bridge itself has to be complex, and multiple bridges are needed because the gap is still quite huge. Now, before we talk about how should we move closer, let's just spend time a little bit on the scientists and policymakers on the next slide. The previous speakers have highlighted also the different characters. Yeah, there are scientists have the goal of advancing science, of course. So activities, we write papers, publish or perish, as is mentioned. And we try to dig in knowledge, more and more knowledge about the very narrow focus. So more and more about less and less focus. And then, we are always triggered to publish, otherwise we'll perish. And then, address in different ways. But policymakers, they have a very broad understanding of issues, and their goal is to, of course, is in some ways the same, to make changing people's life. And the activities are very different. Maybe they don't write publications, but maybe they need to put on fires so that people get interested in the certain issues that they want to discuss. So very, very different in the goals, activities. Also on communication, next slide, we use a very different communication style. Scientists always love jargons, love jargons, mathematic symbols. The more complicated they can make it, the better it looks. In many conversations, it requires a lot of translation, and they love to convince the readers that more research needed to be done. So that's our background. On the other hand, we can understand that policymakers, they love acronyms. They love acronyms, and they describe with another acronym. So their audience is closed. Reports are confidential, and also many are unpublished. So I think it's as a scientist, we are not used so much to talk to the public, to the general public. We are more used to talk to our peers in conferences, seminars, and symposium. And this is the things that we need to move closer between the scientists and the policymakers. The picture I showed you, this was from 2017. It's the first time I was asked to present in this TEDx or TED Talk, but this is in Jakarta, a forum, whereby I was really trained by young mentors on how to speak for the public, and everything is so different. The sequence is different, how we use jargon is different. But again, this is something that scientists need to get used to. And the way I explain about the research I'm doing is to use the term, it's a love story project, because I'm matching the mosquitoes that have Wolbachia with the mosquitoes out there in the field. So finding a ways on how to communicate to the public, how the sophisticated research idea can be put in a simple way. This is something that we need to practice. This move closer between scientists and policymakers. Next, time also matters. This is still continuing on the communication part. We struggle so much. I spent 30 years just to get, a footprint published in the New England Journal of Medicine, very high reputable journal. But policymakers are not interested in that. I said, what journal? Okay, fine. What is an EGM? They are never interested in that. And they prefer other medias to be used for communication that will raise issue. So again, I think as a scientist, we need also to go beyond our comfort zone of writing papers to move into writing in the newspapers, writing in different ways, policy briefs, etc. Next, please. Another factor that I think is also important to reflect the difference is about time, how we use time. Now we know that there can be a very huge gap, long time gap from research into policy. Now scientists sometimes they feel that the longer the research, the better the quality of the research. And then we cannot provide evidence in a very short time. We always say we need time to give a good evidence. While on the other hand, I think policymakers, time is a pressure for them, and they want to make sure that they have answers to many important issues. Maybe the evidence is not available, but they still need answers to this. So yeah, in terms of time, I think this is something that we are coming from a different perspectives. But as scientists, I think we are eager to closen the gap between when the evidence is there with the policy, and hopefully the evidence-based policy. The same, for example, if we are thinking about smoking and lung cancer. Okay, so with this different perspectives, I'd like to jump on the slide whereby I think it's slide 16. There are different ways that we need to address these challenges. Slide. Yeah. After this, yeah, there are these challenges that we need to solve. For example, all the evidence, according to the policymakers, may be different with how we define the evidence. And obviously, this is not just the only data that they use to make policies. Next, please. Yeah. So the need to build a dialogue is very clear. And the two factors here that I would like to highlight, that they are both facilitators and barriers, are actually making personal contact between scientists and policymakers. And again, the factor of timeliness and relevance to the research. So how can we engage? How can academicians be engaged? Next, please. There are various ways, and I think these are future also possibilities that throughout the different platforms, secondments, placement of fellowships, commission research together, and also networking. These are different ways that we could make to make closer between researchers and policymakers. And next, please. Yeah. I was once had an experience which I was difficult to forget. I spoke to a policymakers, and then after I presented the ideas that I have, these policymakers told me that every day he received a guest, a scientist, coming to his office asking for if they could consider it as a good evidence for policy. So this is showing the gaps that we as a scientists are very eager to share our evidence. But then if we don't use the same good communication and languages appropriate to them, this will be difficult for them. So we need to build this collaboration to convince the policymakers. Next. One of the critical skills, I would say, is the advocacy. And here I'm not going to explain this, but you saw that there are many things that scientists need to be familiar with. And in my next slide, I'm asking these questions. Next slide, please. I know you are very ready. You are very enthusiastic to join this leadership program. But what I meant by this question is that, are you ready to go to the not so scientific world? And that is when we interact with the policymakers. So I will end here, and thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully it's useful for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ut. This is so relevant for this program. Thank you so much to getting us in the core of it. Yeah, the next one is Morag Gamble. Morag, you are one of the leading, not just knowledge holders, but I would say distributors of permaculture. So very curious what you can tell us about your work, your life, and what you learned from it.
Thank you, Rainer, and it's lovely to be here with you all. Thank you, Professor Mashelkar and Utarini, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. What powerful presentations and provocations. So many conversations that really align with the sorts of things that I was wanting to talk about as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So things, the self-organization, the biomimicry, nature-informed science, taking a bit of daring and making science accessible to people everywhere. And also seeing that as being best practice. I was really inspired to hear that being talked about, and also about this idea of the types of communication that can be had, and the opening up of different types of conversations. So I would like to acknowledge my esteemed co-panelists and the fabulous Science Fellowship leaders. It's wonderful to be here with you. The fabulous hosts too, and all of you listening here, whether it be live or on the recording later. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm the founder of the Permaculture Education Institute, and basically what we do is we teach and mentor leaders in permaculture, this global myceliating movement of citizen designers, citizen scientists, and citizen educators that is part of a movement of tens of millions of people in most countries around the world. And I've spent about 30 years in this field of permaculture around the world, from teaching in universities and colleges, working with NGOs and companies, and also up in Himalayan communities, as much as being based in urban commons in places like California and Hong Kong, and even Cuba. Indigenous communities as well in the far north of Australia, rural farms, and even villages in Indonesia, where in fact permaculture has landed and been localized for decades. In fact, it's actually, permaculture is very much inspired by traditional practices in places such as Indonesia. So permaculture, let me just describe it a little bit. So permaculture is a term that was coined in Australia about 40 years ago, originally by the combination of the two terms permanent agriculture, but now is far more recognized as being an exploration of permanent culture, and really looking at what does it mean to have one planet living? What does that even look like? So this is the exploration. This is the citizen science that is taking place through the practice and the design and the education of permaculture globally. And so essentially what we're doing, this idea of exploring how we live, is looking at how do we live as if life mattered. And this is rippling out to just about every country, as I said, and it's known in so many different languages. Interestingly, it has no central organizing body that controls it, no funding body, and there is no central leader. Yet it has a broadly agreed global curriculum and language of patterns, and people are creating incredible functioning examples of it everywhere. Community-driven examples, university-driven examples, examples led by organizations and people everywhere, showing how to change lives. And these are places where it's the kind of the evidence that was being spoken about before. This is the place where you can see, taste, touch, feel, hear, engage, share what it means to apply this knowledge. So permaculture is very much an applied science. It's applied systems thinking. So in permaculture, in one way, you could say that it acts as a living system because it adapts and changes to meet its cultural context and set of conditions in a way, as we talk about often in the work with Nora Bates, and it's lifing. Permaculture is lifing. And I've learned through permaculture a lot about leadership and how powerful and effective such an informal global learning community and collaborative approach can be. It's like through this consistent exploration and practice that we now see it embedded in university courses. So something that has risen from the ground up, being informed by Indigenous practices, traditional cultures, through communities exploring together. It has, rather than being a top-down approach, being a community-led transition to looking at what it means to live a sustainable way of life and doing the kind of science and research and exploration that can bring it to the point where it has actually now been adopted in universities, and it's been recognized in things like urban master plans, in health promotion policies, in mental health policies, and also offered throughout schools. So there's many curriculums throughout all of the schools, for example, in Australia and in Timor-Leste, where permaculture is central to the curriculum. So this is an amazing transformation that is seen through this approach. And what I think is also interesting is that it offers up this ground-up approach to some of the big issues that we're facing in our time, such as climate change and physical and mental health. It offers solutions for sustainable food and farming and ecosystems regeneration, all simultaneously. These are the multiple faces of the permaculture solution. And for a long time now, I've been asking and exploring, how do we bring about the kinds of changes we wish to see in the world? And where is it best to spend our time and energy? And whether through this lens of permaculture is the way. We're all facing enormous challenges, and each of these with multiple aspects to them too, existential crises, and we can't, and maybe we should not, solve these alone. So it's really through this multiple dimension approach, this systemic approach, that we can start to address these things. So through decades of research and observation, I've come to see that this means of stepping up as a leader in whatever capacity we might have available to us is a really incredible, powerful way to open up the possibilities, to create the conditions for positive change and innovation, creativity, collaboration, and sharing that somehow disrupts the dominant paradigm. And it opens up the possibilities for people in all stages of their career, in all aspects of our community, to be able to land in these spaces of leadership and to be able to inform the kinds of change that is needed in communities wherever they might be. So I wanted to share with you the 5 core elements that I see in leadership that I think bring about a thriving culture and community around them. It seems like this five key things is a popular theme. So let me describe for you my description from the experience that I've had in working in this for over 3 decades now. So firstly, I think the kind of leaders that make a difference are ones that lift. And by that, I mean that they lift and they celebrate and they acknowledge and they recognize other members of their team. They recognize those that have gone before them. They recognize Indigenous knowledge, wisdom, and Indigenous science. And like I've said before too, that permaculture is deeply embedded in Indigenous practices and recognizes that it's not a new thing. It is a continual growth and emergence from many different traditions of wisdom, and bringing those together in a way that can make sense in a new way. And one of the things that we're doing in Australia here is really deeply connecting with the Indigenous community. So, for example, the Indigenous community here is now recognised to have been the longest existing culture, continuous culture for over 100,000 years is what is currently being said. And their understanding of how to manage landscapes in terms of bioregions, in terms of looking at food systems, the perennial grains, managing water landscapes, looking at fire management regimes. This is where science meets Indigenous culture through a permaculture practice. Also, what I've understood too through the decades that I've been doing this, that some of the most incredibly deep knowledge and understanding has come through walking with perhaps illiterate people, illiterate farmers who have such a deep observation and wisdom and knowledge of place. So I think what I'm trying to say is this acknowledging and lifting and recognizing not just necessarily what we see particularly as one way of knowledge or science, but opening up our potential to celebrate and acknowledge people from all different backgrounds and perspectives. So the leader lifts people and brings them along with them. Secondly, what I see as a key leader would be someone who sparks imagination. someone who sparks curiosity and speaks with enthusiasm. So I often see this in community leaders, particularly those who are sparking from their creativity and, as the professor said earlier, are taking risks. It's contagious. There is something that happens in that. There's a playfulness, there's an opening that happens to start to explore in different ways, and new things emerge that aren't possible. It becomes perhaps a safe place to improvise, a safe place to innovate and explore. And it really does open these opportunities for possibility. And one of the things that I've noticed too with this is that as you are learning this, and as you're at that moment of that key inspiration, this is the moment to share it. So why I focus on educating educators is to find ways to help to communicate this point of exploration when we feel most motivated and inspired to share about it. And that's often when we're in that moment of learning as well. With the Permaculture Education Institute, we offer people who are in refugee settlements free access to all of our materials. So anyone who would like to learn with us can learn with us for free. So there was this one gentleman who was learning with our program. We have 44 modules as part of the Permaculture Educators program. He got to module 5 and he was so inspired that he said, look, I've got to share this with my community. This kind of information will help to make a difference in terms of nutrition and health and local environment. So from the moment that he began to learn it, he began to share it. And then that increased his capacity to be able to inspire so many more and to more deeply throw himself into the learning journey himself. So that's this kind of this citizen educator approach. And because of this, his inspiration, he's now rippled this out to 11 refugee settlements across East Africa and has inspired a different approach to teaching permaculture in other parts of the world. So that's that kind of spark, the curiosity, and based on that enthusiasm. The third description of a really sound leader, I would say, would be someone who cultivates learning communities or communities of practice. And this is something that was spoken about by the last speaker too, and really looking at responding to that need of creating connections, identifying the gaps. But what we focus on within our work is to try and encourage people to identify that and to step up. When in our exploration of looking at what is leadership in a changing world, what does that even look like? What we've tried to do is to open up the conversations beyond our fields and our own practices. So we've gathered together people that we know who are in leadership in science, leadership in policy, leadership in health, leadership in education, leadership in all different areas, and bring them together on regular series of conversations that happen over a period of years. There's a spaciousness that happens. And so this has been an important part of our learning, and also a way that policy is beginning to shift. So some of the people who are in the policy area are speaking directly with ministers and are being informed by practices in so many different areas. Something else that we've been working on too is running a youth fellowship program, something that's run particularly in the gift culture. So our program is called the Ethos Fellowship, and it's kind of like a university without walls. Our goal is to connect young people between the ages of 16 to 21 who are extremely curious about what are the solutions to the big challenges that we're facing in the world today, and connecting them with leading ecological thinkers and designers and scientists and activists in the world, and bring them together in conversation. And so this has been happening since February, and every week they meet. So firstly, they studied through systems view of life with Fritjof Capra. Then they moved to exploring localization with Helena Norberg-Hodge. And last night, actually, we hosted a session. There was a public-facing session where the youth opened up their conversation to an intergenerational group, which has then now sparked off a whole other series of conversations. So it's this myceliating process that's absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that we were talking about last night was this process of education without walls, and how we can engage in research that break through the boundaries and the silos, and create livelihoods that really are based upon this approach. And our guest was Manish Jain, who was a Harvard professor, worked with the World Bank and United Nations, but ended up moving back to his home country of India and focusing on ways in which to create local-based universities. And one of the things he talked about, and I thought was really interesting, that he said, creating a livelihoods instead of deadlyhoods. We often talk about creating livelihoods, but he added the A, so a livelihoods. And I think that was, it really points to the next aspect of leadership that I think is really central, which is putting life at the center of our decision-making. So whatever you're leading, put life at the center. If you're a designer, put, designers if life mattered, educators if life matters, builders if life matters, farmers if life matters. Because when it comes down to it, what are we designing for? Excuse me. Who are we designing for? Who benefits? Excuse me. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And put this in the context, the meta picture of maintaining the conditions on Earth that are conducive for life to thrive. So I think this putting life at the center of our decision making is a key part of this leadership role. And part of this too is the permaculture ethics. For me, this is where this comes through, and why I consistently come back to permaculture, because it does put that at the core. All of the programs that permaculture offers around the world center these three core ethics, which are earth care, people care, and fair share. So it's really about one planet living and social justice, and focusing on how to create healthy human habitats. And finally, and following on from that, leaders, I think, today need to go beyond sustainability to regeneration, and then possibly beyond that to care. So sustainability is essentially about what is maintaining about what's here. So we sustain what we have, but we need to do more. We know we need to do more than that. Regeneration is about restoring the damage and setting up the systems that can be sustainable. But possibly we need to go even beyond regeneration to deep care, because we know once we deeply care for something that will actually make a difference in the way that we move forward with it. And so possibly I could even say that we shift from that sort of deep care and maybe even a love of life that guides all of our actions and our decisions. So just in summary, those kind of 5 key points of leadership that I wanted to bring forth here today was that lift and celebrate others and other cultures, to spark creativity and innovation, to myceliate through these communities of practice, to center life in everything that we do, and to go beyond sustainability. So I wish you all the very best in your life, in your livelihoods, your leadership journeys, and to help bring your spark into the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Morag, to sharing the ethos and principles, and let us not just lost in agriculture and gardening. Yeah, but here comes Jaroslav, our last, not least, keynote speaker of this round of keynote outbursts, as we called it. Jaroslav, you are not just knowledgeable, but you're also practicing innovation, and you're also one of our partners here in this program. So curious to hear from your point of view how innovation is lifting and changing the world in practical ways.
Great, thank you very much, Rainer, and thank you, Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Ut, and Morag. It's been very inspiring to listen to your different perspectives. And when we were designing this part of the program, we really wanted to kind of give you some pieces of context that your leadership will be based on, right? So you will be on a leadership journey throughout this entire program, but you live in a very unique point of time. And we've heard today about science, about innovation, about policy making, how it all interacts. We've heard about sustainability. We heard, about social change and how to bring all of this together, and above all, leadership. And I would just like to add maybe one piece to the puzzle that I think makes today also a very unique point in human history. And I think it represents for you particularly some very interesting opportunities as scientists and as people who are looking to make things better, right? And to bring innovation to your work and perhaps to the world as well. And it is a topic of technologies, and specifically what we would call exponential technologies. And I will explain that in a second. But essentially humanity, if we look at human history, we've always been using tools. And some of our initial tools were, fire, bow, later on a wheel, then writing, watermill. You have kind of the list of the tools here. And those tools have been our allies and created a lot of good things for humanity, but they also created a lot of difficult things, and almost like every tool brought something good and then maybe brought some challenges that we had to later on address, right? So I kind of want to establish that you know, all the technologies, they are not only positive, they also bring challenges with them. However, on a whole, we could speculate that it has helped us to advance as a human civilization, looking at these different technologies. And when you look at this graph, you also see that somehow the technological advancements are kind of becoming, like the time between them are becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. If you look at the history of Homo sapiens about 200,000 years ago, you know, it almost seems like it's taking us shorter time to advance to the new technology. And that is very interesting. And there is a quote from a world-known futurist and innovator who said, "We tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term." And this is all because we tend to think of growth of technology as technology growing in a linear way. And when you have a linear progression, if you take 30 steps in a linear way, if I ask you to stand up, take 30 steps, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 30, you know exactly where you're going to be at the end. You're going to be 30 meters from wherever you are today, perhaps in another room or outside of your house, you know, kind of depends. But it is very predictable for our minds to actually imagine where we're going to be at the end of this journey, and also where we're going to be in the middle of this journey. And you could argue that for a kind of big part of our history, you know, our environments around us have been fairly linear. Like they have, you know, things around us have not been changing that much. And actually, even like there is a lot of research speaking about this, but when we think of our world and even of the future, we think in linear terms as well. Like if I ask you what you will be doing in a year, you'll probably take what you're doing today and you'll kind of make some kind of a projection into the future. You know, when we go to sleep in the night, we kind of expect to wake up pretty much in the same place, doing the same things in the next morning. So we tend to think of ourselves and of our world around us as growing linearly, right? Perhaps sometimes stagnating, not improving, sometimes growing, sometimes decreasing, but we do not think of our world around us exponentially. However, as you've seen on the graph, and you know, as kind of has been researched, the technologies themselves, because like the new technology is always built on the old technology, so they accumulate. There is a bit of a compound interest of technological development. They actually develop exponentially, and that's a very different curve, as you all know from math. So when you take 30 exponential steps from 1 to 30, this is a particular kind of an exponential. It's a doubling curve. So you have 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. You actually get to 1 billion meters, right? And 1 billion meters, it's actually nearly 30 times around our planet. So you have 30 meters where you get to linearly, and you have 1 billion meters, almost 30 times around the planet when you take the same amount of steps, but exponentially. But more importantly, it's very hard for our minds to wrap our head around this because the progress is very disproportionate. Actually, for a very long time, nothing is happening. I always like this example, you know, there is Chinese bamboo is the fastest growing plant in the world. And when you plant it for 5 years, nothing happens. Like there is no seeds, no seedlings, nothing. It's just all in the soil. And then it starts growing, and in 5 weeks, it grows to 25 meters, and it's the fastest growing plant in the world. But for 5 years, you could see nothing. And that's kind of what it feels like. You can actually see here, I've done the math here. Actually, when you're halfway through on the linear progression, you're 50% in. But here on the exponential, you're only 0.003% in. Actually, the last 5 steps account for 97% of the final outcome. So it's something that is very hard for us to grasp. This is one graph that maps the prediction of the world's top experts in solar energy in photovoltaic panels. And they were asked at the end of each year for 12 years in a row to forecast what's going to happen with the market next year. And you can see that the lines in color here are their predictions, and they've been predicting either stagnation or decline. While in reality, the number of photovoltaic panels was growing exponentially for all these 12 years, and they just couldn't spot it, right? Not only 1 year, 2 years, but for the whole 12 years, they've been consistently predicting wrong. And Rainer did mention at the beginning that I'm an expert. I actually don't like the word expert, because I think when we become experts, we start asking some deeper questions about what is possible. And in some sense, actually being an expert could be an anathema to an innovation. So this is kind of tricky. Daniel Kahneman, who is a world-renowned scientist, He won the Nobel Prize for kind of research on behavioral economics. He said this about the future when they asked him last year in an interview for The Guardian, asked him to think about the future. He said, "I have learned never to make forecasts. Not only can I certainly not do it, I'm not sure it can actually be done. There is going to be a massive disruption. The technology is developing very rapidly, possibly exponentially, but people are linear. When linear people are faced with exponential change, they are not going to be able to adapt to that very easily." So Daniel Kahneman here is looking at the challenges of it, but there are also quite some incredible opportunities. So let's have a look at this a little bit. This is a printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. I'm sure you know, all of you know this technology. I've been doing some research actually yesterday and looking at what this printing press has enabled. And before the printing press, there was already, like in the Italian Renaissance, there was already a plan to gather world's knowledge and to spread it to as many people as possible. But it took, it cost an equivalent of a house, of an entire house, to write like manuscript, to write one book by hand. So it was super expensive and the knowledge was not spreading. When printing press was invented, it was a radical revolution in terms of how we could spread knowledge around the world. And it's led to a huge amount of social change, raising educational level, huge amounts of innovation. It was truly a paradigm shifting. Sometimes people call it the Gutenberg moment. It kind of really changed everything. It changed the course of human history in many, many profound ways. And we could actually now speculate that we are living in times that is uniquely now where there are several technologies that are of a potential, paradigm shifting potential, like Gutenberg press, but they are all coexisting at the same time. And many of these technologies have been around for a very long time, some of them for 30, 40, even 100 years. But they have now reached the point of the curve where the most of the progress starts happening. So for a very long time, there's been little progress on them. And now they have reached a point where they really are developing maturity and user friendliness that actually we can start benefiting from them as society, just like we've done from the printing press. And some of these examples are, AI, blockchain, biotechnology, augmented virtual reality, drones, different renewable energies, quantum computing, nanotechnology, self-driving cars, robotics, 3D printing, and there is probably more to kind of look at that. So we live in times, and your leadership will take time specifically in a decade where these technologies are coming to fore. And as I've mentioned before, this can have challenging things ahead, but it can also have huge opportunities. So I have selected actually 4 of these technologies just to give you brief examples about how these apply specifically to science and technology, because obviously you do science and then you invent technologies, but also it works the other way around. Once these technologies come to fruition, they can help you do science in much more kind of profoundly faster and better ways. So let's look at AI first. Some of you might know this. This is a little video that is showing DeepMind, which is an AI laboratory now owned by Google. And they have last year released something called AlphaFold. AlphaFold was building on success of their AlphaGo and AlphaZero learning kind of AI systems. What is unique about the AlphaZero especially, and then AlphaFold, is that it's kind of an intersection between neuroscience and computer science. It's basically a neural network that they taught to learn by itself and improve over time by kind of being in the AlphaZero case, it was playing millions of computer games against itself in virtual environments, and it has become better than any kind of system that humans can produce, and actually beat AlphaGo 100-0 in the game of Go. And they've applied the same technology to AlphaFold, and they've actually resolved the protein folding challenge, which has been for biologists kind of a big unresolvable challenge for several decades. But it actually looks at, I'm not an expert in this, but it looks at predicting the 3D structure of a protein based on amino acids, right? And all life is based on protein. And they've been able to kind of come up with an algorithm that is better than any other method in terms of looking, having the accuracy of predicting actually how in 3D the protein would look like based on its amino acids. And what they have done is that they have taken this and they have made it a Creative Commons, right? So this whole entire algorithm can now be built on by researchers and scientists all around the world and kind of advance it farther. They have now, I think, almost 1 million kind of different, proteins being mapped by the system, and they have a huge database that is growing. And similarly to Morag, what she was speaking about, how she has spread the knowledge of permaculture, they are also spreading this scientific tool. So I think it's quite an interesting example. And actually, Denis Hassabis, who is the founder of DeepMind, he speaks about AI as kind of being a great language for biology, because biology is very complex. And self-running AI systems is kind of his hope of being able to capture and understand biology better, which has profound implications for biology research and for science. One of the projects he's working on is creating kind of a computational model of a human cell, which is incredibly complex system, but being able to approximate that with self-learning AI systems is something that he's working on. So this is first technology. A second one, 3D printing, and this is a little bit more practical. 3D printing is a technology that enables to 3D print in, from different materials, objects. And basically, it all becomes about the design. So if you have the right designs and you have a local 3D printer, you can 3D print all kinds of different things. And here are 6 different examples of how scientists are 3D printing different tools in labs to radically drop costs. Many of these tools cost 10 to 100 times less to 3D print than to actually buy them. It is actually a little centrifuge. So again, for any of you who are biologists, it is a little 3D printed centrifuge that is basically kind of, printed, and then, the mechanism kind of works. It's put together. It has a little kind of battery operated inside, and yeah, just kind of works as a centrifuge, but is about 100 times cheaper than kind of a commercial centrifuge that you would need. So 3D printing is another technology that can, and actually one aspect of technology is it's kind of demonetizes and democratizes access to a lot of different things that previously were inaccessible. And there is a lot of innovation now being done, kind of do-it-yourself DIY innovation using 3D printing and other technologies as such. 3D printing obviously has other implications, for example, for biological research, 3D printing human tissues, kind of human-like tissues, etc., biological tissues, and other things. A third one is drones, and this is a little project. This is a company that actually is using drones to be mapping coastal environments. I know that some of you are working in marine science, and drones are actually today being used to create detailed 3-dimensional maps of natural habitats and being able to assess, for example, the level of pollution, or also the level of restorative and regenerative initiatives that are being done all around the world. So, it's kind of a little low-cost drones. It flies, it kind of takes pictures, and they then take all these different things and they create 3D different maps, kind of putting these things together. So again, another exponential technology that is making possible something that was never possible before. I mean, before, if you had to do this, you had to launch a satellite and, try to get this picture from commercial satellites, but it was very kind of difficult. But now this is now being possible at a local level, kind of around that. And the final one that maybe I thought to share is obviously virtual and augmented reality. Essentially, throughout the last couple of years, we've all gotten used to more online lives. But for you as a scientist, if you have an idea, and Dr. Mashelkar spoke about this, have these bold ideas and kind of be original. If you have an idea like this, it's now more easier than ever to reach a global audience very easily. This tool also has potential for education, for spreading knowledge, spreading know-how, for reaching people all around the planet. And obviously, we don't all have virtual reality headsets, but for example, what I'm showing here is just work on a simple browser with a regular computer. So these are like the different examples. I could go much more into this, but I do not have the time. But what I was hoping to show you is that we live in very unique times for the many things that were already discussed. But one interesting and powerful ally at our disposal, if we use it correctly, is modern exponential technology. And these can completely change how science is done, what is possible in science. For example, AI is a prime candidate for that. But it can also open up opportunities that you maybe never thought that you've had. And what I'd like you to consider, throughout this program, and I'll be helping you to do that with some of my content, is to really think beyond what you have maybe thought before because of some of these things that are possible. Just one final story to close. This is a very well-known picture. You've probably seen this. On the left, you have Fifth Avenue in 1900. In New York, you have all cars, and so you have all horses and one car, right, in the red circle over there. Then on the right, you have the same picture 13 years later, and you have all cars, and there is actually one horse, which is kind of here on the left. But there were many people who, when cars were introduced, were saying that horses are not going away; it's going to be here forever. Yet 13 years later, we've completely changed the dominant mode of transport. And that is kind of a fascinating entrepreneurial story of Henry Ford, obviously, and many powerful lessons kind of to learn from that. But what I think is interesting around this is that it always takes kind of science, technology, leadership, and kind of risk-taking and courage to combine all of these things to make them happen. But there is also a little of a side story that I think is quite relevant, because we are facing a lot of environmental problems around this. When the horses in the 1900s were driving everywhere, there was a big environmental problem in major world cities, which was horse manure, right? So the number of horses was growing, more people could buy horses, and horses, when they walk the streets, they kind of relieve themselves. And there were serious conferences at the time looking at what are we going to do? Like, it's a huge environmental problem. We're going to all drown in horse manure in all of our cities. And actually 13 years later, it was never even a problem. And this was because a new technology came and was able to spread kind of globally, and it replaced the old technology. And what I think is, sometimes when we're looking at our current environmental problems, we are looking at how we can resolve them with today's technology. But I actually think many of our today's problems, not only environmental, but many others, can be resolved by future technologies, maybe technologies that were not yet invented, technologies that will be ushered through some of these developments we were speaking about. Of course, as it always is, technology can also create new problems that we have not even envisioned. It just seems to be the name of the game. But I think there is a huge positive potential in the technology. So I'll finish with a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which he said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And I hope this has inspired you maybe to think beyond what you would normally think. And I have much more content around this for further sessions. But I think your leadership and your innovation is now, you're in a better position than ever because of some of these enabling tools that are at your disposal. So I do encourage you to dream bold. And I fully agree with Dr. Mashelkar's message on there. So thank you. Over to you, Rainer.
Yeah, thank you, Jaroslav, for introducing even what comes in the program at the same time, not just the power of our technological changes, just to illustrate them so beautifully. Thank you. Yeah, we are now entering a moment where we will have a short break, but please hang on, because Shannon will explain you how we will come back from the break and give you some instructions on how to basically indicate where you will be after the break. So you will immediately start in a breakout room after the break with your preferred keynote speaker there. So Shannon.